Hello and welcome to the historynetwork.org podcast. If you would like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to, and you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The historynetwork.org podcast, season 38, episode 3. Valour Lost. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. In this three-part series, we look at the 8 recipients of the Victoria Cross who forfeited the award due to their later actions, as well as other recipients who fell on hard times, and with particular reference to the case of modern Victoria Cross for Australian recipient Ben Roberts Smith, accused of murder and war crimes in Afghanistan. During the Crimean War, March 1854 to February 1856, the movement to recognise the valour of the ordinary fighting man of the various branches of the British Armed Forces gained immense momentum. The Crimean War was the first conflict where newspaper reporters were with the troops. Today we'd use the term embedded, and who wrote back to their publications with details of the heroism of the men of the rank and file. The writings of the Times reporter William Howard Russell, often considered one of the first war correspondents, especially promoted the case for recognising the bravery of the common soldier. Russell spent 22 months covering the events of the Crimean War. His reports and others led to discussion of an award for valour open to men of any rank, and in late January 1856 the royal warrant for the Victoria Cross was introduced. The recipients of the Victoria Cross, technically they are investees since they are invested with the award, were to be recommended at a regimental level, and their recommendations then passed up the chain of command. The first awards were gazetted in February 1857, and the first medals were presented to their recipients in June 1857 by Queen Victoria in Hyde Park, London, backdated to the Crimean War. The earliest action for which one was awarded occurred in June 1854. The Victoria Cross became and remains the highest honour for valour in British and Commonwealth armed forces. Prior to the inauguration of the Victoria Cross, only the bravery of officers, and therefore members of the aristocracy, could be officially recognised, and only by installing them as members of the Most Honourable Order of Bath, an order of chivalry inaugurated by King George I in 1725. The order had been expanded in 1815, but was still only open to aristocratic officers. The 15th and final clause of the original warrant for the Victoria Cross, issued in February 1857, states, "In order to make such additional provision as shall effectually preserve pure this most honourable distinction, it is ordained that if any person on whom such distinction shall be conferred, he be convicted of treason, cowardice, felony, or of any infamous crime, or if he is accused of any such offence, and doth not after a reasonable time surrender himself to be tried for the same, his name shall forthwith be erased from the registry of individuals upon whom the said declaration shall have been conferred. It is hereby further declared that we, our heirs and successors, shall be the sole judges of the circumstances demanding such expulsion, Moreover, we shall at all times have power to restore such pensions as may at any time have been expelled, both to the enjoyment of the decoration and pension. In the 160-year history of the Victoria Cross, only 8 recipients have gained the infamy of forfeiting their award. The last forfeiture was in 1908, the first in 1861. The history of forfeitures of the Victoria Cross raises some sad circumstances where recipients who had performed the most heroic of deeds later fell on hard times, or, subsequent to their award, behaved in a manner which ranged from questionable to criminal. Any forfeiture needed to be discussed in Parliament, and a royal warrant issued announcing the forfeiture. The name of the recipient would also be erased from the Victoria Cross register and their Victoria Cross pension cancelled. When instituted, this was £10, but Queen Victoria raised it to £50. In 1898, current living recipients receive £10,000 tax-free. Edward St. John Daniel. The first of the 8 men to achieve the notoriety of forfeiting his Victoria Cross was Midshipman Edward St. John Daniel. In October 1854, at Sebastopol, when he was 17, Midshipman Daniel was one of the volunteers from HMS Diamond who brought powder to the battery at Sebastopol under heavy enemy fire. He performed bravely again at the Battle of Inkerman on November 5th, and again during the assault on the enemy Redan fortification in June 1855. His commanding officer on all 3 occasions, Captain William Peel, third son of Prime Minister John Robert Peel, also received the Victoria Cross for a separate action on the same day, in October 1854. Daniel also served in the Second Anglo-Burmese War, 1852-53, and the Indian Mutiny, or Indian Rebellion, 1857, rising to the rank of lieutenant. However, Daniel forfeited his award in September 1861 at the age of only 24, his brave deeds having been performed when he was 17 and 18. He was convicted of desertion and of evading court-martial in Corfu. What his offence was has never been confirmed, although some have suggested that he attempted to drown a fellow officer, or perhaps of drunkenness. A contemporary claimed he had taken indecent liberties with 4 subordinate officers aboard the HMS Victor Emmanuel. The royal warrant which announced the forfeiture only made reference to a disgraceful offence. Daniel is the only Navy Victoria Cross forfeiture, and the only officer, since he was a lieutenant at the time of forfeiture, of his award. Less than 2 weeks after the forfeiture warrant, Daniel was aboard ship bound for Australia, where he became a gold miner. In Melbourne he then volunteered for 3 years of military service in the New Zealand Wars in Taranaki in 1864. After this service he enlisted as a member of the Auckland Constabulary in November 1867. Altercations had broken out between Catholic and Protestant gold miners on the west coast of the South Island, and Daniel travelled to the port of Hokitika as part of a 70-strong force to keep the peace. Daniel had been ill for some time, however, and died in Hokitika in May 1868. He was given a full military funeral. In 1981, Daniel's family sought to have the Victoria Cross reinstated, but their petition was rejected, arguing that the request for restoration must come from the recipient themselves, and it was regarded as inappropriate to reverse a decision made in 1861. James Maguire. Irishman James Maguire was born in Enniskillen, County Fermanagh, in 1826. He signed up for 10 years with the Honourable East India Company in 1849, arriving in India later that year with the 1st Bengal European Fusiliers. He served in the Burmese War, 1852-53, being involved in the relief of Pegu in December 1852. By the time of the Indian Mutiny in 1857, he was a sergeant serving as part of the Bengal Army. During the assault on Delhi on September the 14th that year, Maguire and the drummer of his regiment, Miles Ryan, were part of the first column led by Brigadier General John Nicholson. The column stormed a breach in the walls near the Kashmir Gate and then moved west, taking the Mori Bastion. The column then reached the Kabul Gate, along with men of the 75th Stirlingshire Regiment of Foot and a party of Sikhs. Awaiting orders, boxes of ammunition from which the troops were replenishing their supplies ignited and began to explode. While everyone else ran every which way, uncertain as to where the explosions were coming from, and unsure if they were under fire, Maguire and Ryan ran towards the exploding munitions, seized the boxes which had not yet ignited, and threw them over the parapet into the water. Their Victoria Cross citation, gazetted on December 24, 1858, stated that they, by their coolness and personal daring, saved the lives of many at the risk of their own. Maguire went on to serve during the relief of Lucknow in November 1857. He was discharged in 1859 at the end of his 10-year term, receiving a pension of £1 a day. He returned to Enniskillen, although he travelled to Windsor Castle in January 1860 to receive his Victoria Cross from Queen Victoria herself. It is unclear when Maguire forfeited his medal, but it would seem he stole a cow belonging to his uncle during a family dispute, and he was subsequently sentenced to 9 months in jail at Derry. This conviction was probably the cause of his forfeiture. Several sources state that he committed suicide in Derry whilst in prison for these offences on December 22, 1862, a week before his 35th birthday. This date would, however, seem to be the date he was struck off the Victoria Cross register, and the accounts which state this was the day of his suicide do not actually make the connection between the two dates. He did not commit suicide at that time, however, since in March 1863 Maguire applied to have his Victoria Cross and his pension restored. This was refused, although a Victoria Cross pension book records that later he was still receiving the £10 annuity due to Victoria Cross recipients. Since he must have been alive to petition for the restoration of his Victoria Cross in March 1863, the date and cause of Maguire's death is actually unknown. The record of him still receiving the annuity may be a clerical error. Valentine Bambrick. Valentine Bambrick was born in Cawnpore, now Kanpur, India, in 1837. He was an army child. His father, uncle, and older brother all served with the 11th Hussars. His father and uncle fighting at Waterloo, and his older brother John even charged with the Light Brigade at Balaclava in 1854, and survived. Valentine, however, joined the 1st Battalion, 60th Rifles, at the age of 16 in 1853. Stationed in India, the 1st Battalion took part in the Indian Mutiny from its outbreak in May 1857. The battalion was involved in the siege of Delhi and the campaign which followed to root out mutineers. In May 1858, during the assault on the city of Bareilly in Uttar Pradesh, some 225 kilometers east of Delhi, Bambrick and his battalion was involved in heavy street fighting against Muslim Ghazi mutineers. With his company commander, Lieutenant Gromer Ashburnham, Private Bambrick was isolated and cornered by a group of Ghazis. Bambrick fought off the 3 of them and killed them all, although he was wounded twice while doing so. His act of bravery was gazetted in December 1858, and he received his medal in 1859, although somewhat peculiarly there is no record of an investiture. The 60th Rifles returned to England in 1860, but Bambrick chose to stay in India and transferred to the 87th Royal Irish Fusiliers. Chose may be a euphemistic term, since he was jailed 3 times in May, July, and November 1859, possibly for insubordination or possibly on alcohol-related charges. He may therefore have been in jail when the 60th was transferred back to England, but none of these were enough to warrant a forfeiture. The 87th too eventually returned to Ireland, where it was stationed at Curragh Camp, County Kildare, Ireland in 1862. There Bambrick served a further jail term in March 1863 for desertion. This also did not lead to forfeiture. The 87th was transferred to Aldershot, Hampshire in November 1863. There, on November 15th, the day before his discharge for his 10 years' service, the event which led to his forfeiture finally occurred. Passing a lodging-house, Bambrick heard a woman's cries from upstairs, and going to her aid, found a commissariat lance corporal, Henry Miller Russell, beating her. He intervened. Russell, however, brought a charge of assault against Bambrick at the Winchester Assizes on December 3rd, accusing Bambrick and one Charlotte Johnson, a prostitute, of assault, and of stealing 4 of his medals. Bambrick's version of events was that the medals had been ripped off when he restrained Russell. They later disappeared, but were found in the hallway. Bambrick also claimed that he had no interest in Russell's service medals, since he himself had the Victoria Cross. The court, which met on December 12, 1863, accepted Russell's version of events, that Bambrick, with Johnson, had invited Russell to drink, but had then seized him, and that it was he who had cried murder, not the woman. Russell's version of events also claimed that Bambrick was a resident of the lodging-house. The female prostitute, assaulted by Russell, only identified as Haley in the assize records, had unfortunately left Winchester, and so could not appear as a witness for Bambrick. Russell was himself the only witness for the prosecution. In what now seems like an obvious miscarriage of justice, Russell, ashamed to be beaten up by Bambrick and ashamed of visiting a prostitute himself, he was a married man, and the outrageously unlikely story of the theft of Russell's medals, Bambrick was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years' penal servitude in Pentonville prison. The royal warrant of forfeiture was backdated to December 3rd. Bambrick first attempted suicide in prison in September 1863, inflicting serious wounds on his own throat and chest with a razor. He recovered, but successfully took his own life in prison on April 1st, 1864, at the age of 26. He left a letter written on slate to his family, asking for forgiveness for all the unhappiness he had caused them, and protesting his innocence of the crime for which he had been convicted. He was buried in an unmarked grave in St. Pancras in Islington Cemetery. It remains unidentified, and the whereabouts of Bambrick's Victoria Cross is also unknown, one of only a few whose locations are lost or unknown. Michael Murphy. Michael Murphy was born in Cahir, County Tipperary, Ireland, in 1837. In 1855, at the age of 18, Murphy enlisted in the 17th Lancers at Cork. The unit was, however, still on campaign in the Crimea. They had lost most of their number during the charge of the Light Brigade in October 1854. 7 officers and 67 men remained out of 145 who began the charge, not to mention most of their horses. At the conclusion of the charge, only 38 men of the 17th could be found. The others had been taken prisoner. 3 men of the 17th Lancers were awarded Victoria Crosses during the charge. Murphy therefore began his training at the Portobello Barracks in Dublin with the 16th Lancers. The 17th departed Crimea in May 1856 for service in India, just prior to the outbreak of the mutiny in May 1857, and Murphy was probably expected to meet the regiment there, but we next find him with the 2nd Battalion Military Train in October 1856 working as a farrier. We do not know why Murphy transferred to the military train, although they must have needed farriers as much as a cavalry unit. With his new battalion, in March 1857, he departed Curragh camp and boarded ship at Dublin for Woolwich. From there he re-embarked in April bound for Hong Kong, but was diverted to Calcutta, now Kolkata, India, after the Indian Mutiny had broken out on May 10th. He landed in August and was deployed in the relief of Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh in the northeast. His battalion then joined the Azimgarh Field Force in Uttar Pradesh in March 1858. It was there at Natupur in April 1858 where Murphy defended a fallen officer, Samuel Morley, who would also be awarded the Victoria Cross for his action, although not for some 2 years after Murphy's award. Both Murphy and Morley were wounded during their actions, and Hamilton died of his wounds the next day. But Murphy's actions were recommended for the Victoria Cross and gazetted in May 1859. For daring gallantry on the 15th April 1858 when engaged in the pursuit of Kuer Singh's army from Azaragurh, in having rescued Lieutenant Hamilton, adjutant of the 3rd Sikh Cavalry, who was wounded, dismounted, and surrounded by the enemy, Farrier Murphy cut down several men, and although himself severely wounded, he never left Lieutenant Hamilton's side until support arrived. Murphy's injuries meant he was invalided to Calcutta and returned to England. He continued to serve with the Military Train Corps, rejoining them at Aldershot in October 1859. He was presented with his Victoria Cross at Windsor Castle on January 4th, 1860. Although Murphy was gazetted in 1859, Morley was not, even though he had acted with Murphy. He was not mentioned in the initial citation. When Morley returned to England in 1860, and after Murphy had received his award, Morley complained of this to Lord Alfred Paget, who was inspecting Aldershot. Lord Paget ordered an immediate inquiry, and Morley was soon gazetted in August 1860, and then received his award before the year was out in November. His citation reads, "Private Samuel Morley, seeing the predicament that Lieutenant Hamilton was in, although Morley's horse had been shot from under him, immediately and most gallantly rushed up on foot to his assistance, and in conjunction with Farrier Murphy, who has already received the Victoria Cross for the same thing, cut down one of the sepoys, and fought over Lieutenant Hamilton's body until further assistance came up, and thereby was the means of saving Lieutenant Hamilton from being killed on the spot." Murphy was promoted to Farrier Sergeant in 1860 and married that year too. He already had 2 children with his wife. He moved with his battalion to Woolwich. He then served in Canada in 1862 and then returned to Woolwich before moving to various places around the United Kingdom, including the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, and the Curragh, Northern Ireland. He would continue to serve with the military train until 1869, when they were disbanded. They would become the Army Service Corps, and Murphy joined the new corps as a Farrier Major at Aldershot. In July 1871 he was transferred to the 7th Hussars. In January 1872 a civilian named James Green was stopped at Aldershot by another Farrier Major named Knott. Green was found in possession of a donkey and cart, and the cart contained sacks of oats and hay. Green told the officer that Major Farrier Murphy had given him permission to remove the goods. Murphy and Green were arrested. At the trial at Winchester, Green was acquitted, but Murphy was found guilty of theft and sentenced to 9 months' hard labour. His Victoria Cross was forfeited on March 5, 1872. Murphy had worn the medal throughout his trial. The medal could not be found after the forfeiture, however, and his wife and children had vacated their accommodation. As a Farrier Major, Murphy's was the highest ranking forfeiture. He was released from prison in late November 1872 and returned to his regiment at Hounslow in London. His wife and children returned soon after. In 1874 Murphy was transferred to the 9th Lancers, then the 5th Lancers in early 1875. Only a month later he was discharged at Colchester after nearly 20 years' service in the British Army, perhaps due to increasing ill health. He moved to Northumberland and became a blacksmith. His wife was admitted to an asylum in 1889, and Murphy died of pneumonia in 1893. His wife would die in 1900. 5 years after his death in 1898, Murphy's Victoria Cross was offered for sale by an anonymous seller. It was bought by a Master Sergeant of the Royal Service Corps and is now held by the Royal Logistics Corps Museum. Morley's is held there too. He was discharged in 1870 and died in 1888. Well, that's it for this episode, and when we come back in a couple of weeks, we will continue with the story of Thomas Lane. Thanks once again, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.